Morning, good to have you with us on this Thursday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to begin our show in the Middle East, where a last-minute deal to extend the truce between Israel and Hamas by an extra day came into effect this morning.
The deal was struck at the 11th hour overnight. It comes after Hamas freed an additional 16 Israeli and foreign hostages, including an American with dual citizenship, while Israel released 30 Palestinian prisoners. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel this morning on a diplomatic mission. He says efforts are ongoing to extend that deal for a longer stretch. The extension also gives more breathing room to Palestinians living in Gaza and allows for more aid to reach the devastated enclave. Speaking yesterday, the UN Secretary General said that while he welcomed the agreement, it was not enough to support the needs of Gaza's suffering population.
The level of aid to Palestinians in Gaza remains completely inadequate to meet the huge needs of more than 2 million people. The people of Gaza are in the midst of an epic humanitarian catastrophe before the eyes of the world. We must not look away. We believe we need a true humanitarian ceasefire.
In a few moments, we'll hear from the host of Oh My World on YouTube, former NSC director for Syria and Lebanon, Hagar Shamali. But before that, let's get to NBC's chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, for the latest in Tel Aviv. Richard?
The truce between Hamas and Israel is now entering a very difficult phase and could be breaking down. There had been an expectation last night and this morning that there would be an extension, potentially a 2-day extension, perhaps more than that. But in the 11th hour, Israel and Hamas only agreed to a 1-day extension. So today is the last day of the truce between the two sides. Another hostage release is expected to come today. But this almost broke down overnight. Hamas initially put forward a list saying it was going to release 7 hostages and then hand over the body of 3 of the hostages who were killed, it says, by Israeli airstrikes. Israel rejected that. And now when you talk to Israeli officials and when you speak to Hamas, and Hamas is telling its people to be ready for the military campaign to begin, it does feel that tension is resuming and we could be once again going into a military phase of this conflict where Israel renews its campaign against the Gaza Strip to destroy and dislodge Hamas from power. There will be costs if Israel does resume its campaign. Costs for Gaza, obviously, where the health ministry, which is run by Hamas, says that around 15,000 people have already been killed, and costs for Israel. Public relations cost. Israel has faced an enormous international backlash because of its military campaign against Gaza, because of all the civilians that have been killed, and a backlash within the country because if it begins this military campaign, it could slow down or even stop the hostage exchange program, the hostage releases being swapped for Palestinian prisoners. But Israel wants to keep pressure on Hamas, and it is not satisfied with the pace of the releases so far, not satisfied with Hamas's answers about how many hostages it has, how many are alive, how many are actually in Hamas's custody. So we will see what happens. Secretary Blinken is here trying to encourage dialogue, trying to extend the truce, trying to convince Israel that if it does resume its military campaign, to carry it out in a more targeted way.
All right, Richard, thank you for your reporting.
For more, let's bring in Hagar Shamali. She's the host of Oh My World on YouTube and a former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the UN and former NSC director for Syria and Lebanon. Hagar, good morning. Always great to have you with us. So I want to start with what Richard had just said there at the end of this idea of being more targeted. A U.S. official told Politico, that's what viewers are seeing right now on their screen, that the U.S. and Israel have been talking behind the scenes for weeks about these future operations, what Israel's going to do coming up in the south of Gaza. That's, of course, where many civilians have now evacuated to. The U.S. is pressuring Israel to be surgical and targeted, as you can see here, to prevent civilian casualties when possible. How much influence does the U.S. have over Israel's tactics in the region if and when combat operations restart?
Well, John Kirby actually on Tuesday added that the U.S. has told Israel that they do not support Israel moving into the south just yet until it can account for all Palestinians and all internally displaced Palestinians. And he said that Israel was receptive to that. And it doesn't surprise me because the consultations that go between the United States and Israel are very close at all times, let alone during a conflict. It's going to be even more close. And so if there's anybody that can influence Israel's decision making, and it's not always going to happen, but if anybody can do it, it is the United States. And it doesn't surprise me that for the last few weeks, the U.S. is trying to press them to be as targeted and surgical as possible, because what they're trying to say is, listen, we support your goal in defeating Hamas. It is important for your security, it's important for the world's security, and it's important for a two-state solution. However, it doesn't help for Israel's broader security to have such a high civilian death toll. And I think what the U.S. is saying, what the Biden administration is saying is, listen, we can make this happen. We can work this, but it needs to be a war that is more targeted, more patient, more surgical, as they said, and I believe that it's achievable.
There are also growing concerns this morning about escalating violence in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. That's where the UN says more than 200 Palestinians have been killed in recent weeks. Secretary of State Blinken expected to visit the occupied West Bank. He's likely going to meet with Palestinian leader Abbas. What's at stake here? How important is that meeting?
Well, this kind of goes back to the point that you were making earlier about the truce and how fragile it is, because you have to take these things day by day, even hour by hour. And that would be the case with any war. Truces and negotiations and hostage swaps or hostage prisoner swaps would be sensitive and tenuous in any war. But when you're dealing with a terrorist organization, it's a whole other level. And so when you've got violence coming up in the West Bank, you had a terrorist attack in Jerusalem this morning. These things make it very difficult because you need a partner on the Palestinian side to ensure that the day after Gaza there's going to be somebody there to pick up the trash, that there's going to be someone there who can help control and the land and prevent future terrorist attacks. And Mahmoud Abbas is a very weak, very corrupt leader, but he is the only chance that we have right now. He is the leader of the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian Authority is the one that represents officially the Palestinian people. And in this case, we need him to work and to cooperate, and he has cooperated with the Israeli government before many times. He says he's willing to take control over Gaza when the war ends. And again, while he's not loved by everybody, I think he's the only chance we have until they come up with somebody new.
Hagar, so the truce right now between Israel and Hamas is expected to continue through at least today. But then what do you think happens next? I mean, obviously, we've seen each day means more hostages are released. Do you think another deal will be made in order to get Hamas to release more hostages?
Well, so they're going to take this day by day and get as many hostages as they can released. But unfortunately, I believe that once they hit the group of hostages who are all male and soldier, this is where things are going to get difficult. And I hope I'm wrong about this, but the fact is that history has shown that Hamas, when they've had male Israeli soldiers, one the most famous, Gilad Shalit, they held on to him for 6 years, and then he was traded for 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. You've already heard Hamas leaders saying that they would be willing to release all of those leaders in exchange for all of the Palestinian prisoners, which is just not going to happen. And so that's where things are going to get difficult, and that's kind of why I expect the war to continue, in part because of the hostages, and in part because Israel says it wants to defeat Hamas, and in order to do that, it needs to go to the south of Gaza.
Hagar Shamali, as always, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
This morning, Japan is asking the U.S. military to temporarily ground the Osprey aircraft following yesterday's fatal crash. Crews are continuing to search the waters off the southern coast of Japan, looking for wreckage and trying to figure out what happened. NBC News Pentagon correspondent Courtney Cubie has the latest details.
On Wednesday, another deadly crash of a U.S. military Osprey. In this case, it was a U.S. Air Force One, a CV-22, off the southern coast of Japan. The airmen on board were part of a routine training mission that turned deadly. A U.S. Air Force Osprey crashed into the waters off Japan's southern coast with 8 U.S. airmen on board. U.S. military officials say the remains of one have been found and that search and rescue efforts continue. The airmen assigned to the 353rd Special Operations Wing at Kadena Air Base in Japan were on a training mission when Japanese officials say the Osprey disappeared around 2:40 p.m. local time. The Osprey is unique, capable of taking off and hovering like a helicopter, then tilting its rotors forward to fly like a plane. But it's an aircraft with a troubled history. In August 2022, Air Force Special Operations Command grounded all 52 of its Ospreys for more than 2 weeks after clutches repeatedly malfunctioned. And deadly crashes with Marine Corps Ospreys as well, including 4 Marines killed when their Osprey crashed during an exercise in Norway last year, 5 more Marines killed just 3 months later in Southern California. And this August, a Marine Corps Osprey went down in Australia, killing 3 Marines on board, including Norm Lewis's son, Major Toby Lewis.
Well, I'm concerned about any pilot, military pilot, and flying and the things they have to do.
He says Toby loved flying the Osprey.
I don't know the cause of Toby's crash, and I do not know the cause of this crash, and I think the military will figure that out, and they'll decide whether these airframes are still safe to fly or not, or they'll correct the problem.
Boeing and Bell, who build the Osprey, say they are standing by to provide any requested investigation support. Defense officials tell NBC News search and rescue efforts could continue for the next 72 hours. Meanwhile, U.S. military officials continue to notify the next of kin of those who were on board that Osprey aircraft, telling them that their loved ones are missing. Back to you,
Courtney. Thank you so much.
On Capitol Hill, a vote is expected as soon as Friday on whether to expel embattled New York Congressman George Santos from the House of Representatives.
Yeah, an ethics committee report earlier this month found that Santos had violated federal law and misused campaign funds. He has denied any wrongdoing. Well, Santos would be only the 6th member of the House to be expelled ever and the 3rd since the Civil War. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he's concerned, though, ahead of the vote.
What we've said as the leadership team is we're going to allow people to vote their conscience. I think it's the only appropriate thing we can do. I trust that people will make that decision thoughtfully and in good faith. I personally have real reservations about doing this. I'm concerned about a precedent that may be set for that. So where everybody's working through that.
For the latest, we're joined now by Axios senior political reporter Eugene Scott. Eugene, good to have you with us this morning. So Santos says he expects to be kicked out of Congress, though Speaker Johnson, as we heard there, does have some reservations, some concerns about the expulsion vote. What is Johnson worried about?
Well, this will set a precedent. I mean, we know we're in hyper-partisan times, and lots of people in Congress, even within parties, do not like one another or want to work with one another. And coming to the conclusion that someone should not be in Congress, despite not being convicted of a crime yet, this is a first-time scenario that these lawmakers find themselves in, and Johnson thinks this won't be the last if this moves forward.
We know, as we mentioned as we were heading into this piece right here, that only a handful of House members ever have been removed from office. And that's to say nothing of how many scandals there have been in Congress, and lawmakers have sort of survived those, not been expelled. Why is it difficult to get the votes needed for expulsion? What are some of the challenges that come with that?
Well, one of the challenges right now is we're in an incredibly tight Congress, right? Republicans only have a slight advantage. Kevin McCarthy was saved quite a few times because of George Santos. Mike Johnson could very well find himself in a similar situation and is looking at these numbers. And individuals have relationships with these folks that they, want to keep intact and know could ultimately harm them in the future if they do something like this, like ending a political career. And so there's a lot of back scratching that happens on Capitol Hill, and setting off a scenario like this could make things difficult for the future of these individuals as they pursue their political careers long term.
As you mentioned, Eugene, it is a tight Congress. If Santos is removed, then what are the next steps taken to fill his congressional seat here in New York? And do we know who might be in the running for that?
Sure. Well, the governor of New York has to call a special election, which has to happen in about 70 to 80 days. At least 7 Democrats and 9 Republicans have already expressed interest in Santos' seat, including some state lawmakers, a former the Democrat who used to hold it before Santos had it. And so we could see even more names coming up. But this will happen really soon. And there's a lot of interest in this seat because Democrats want to win it back. Republicans want to keep it.
It is a competitive district. All right,
Yeah.
Eugene Scott, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, grab your rain boots. We are expecting some wet weather across the country from the southern plains to the Pacific Northwest.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is with us this morning with a look at the forecast. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Great to see you. And yeah, we have a couple spots that are going to see some wet weather. We have some snow, we have some storms, and some really heavy rain expected in spots. First, we'll start out west, the Pacific Northwest. An atmospheric river event is setting up once again. We've had these week after week, and that's going to bring a lot of rain on shore, especially along the coast. Higher elevation snow. We could see 1 to 2 feet in the highest mountains. And then the Four Corners, we're watching the chance for rain, a mixture, and also snow. Once again, going to see 1 to 2 feet in the higher elevations of the mountains of the Four Corners. But we are watching the southern plains. This is going to be the big weather story throughout the day. We have an area of low pressure. It's pulling moisture off the Gulf. We're also kind of interacting that cooler air with warmer air. And we're looking at the chance for some strong storms as we head throughout the afternoon hours. We've already had severe thunderstorm warnings in portions of southeastern Texas. And that's what we're going to see as we go throughout the afternoon hours. 7 million people at risk. We could see a few tornadoes, damaging hail 1 inch or greater. Also winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour, especially where you see this orange shading, but not ruling out where it's yellow too. So Lufkin, Livingston, Bryan, also Beaumont, Houston, you're going to be in the mix for some really strong storms, or the likelihood of that, and also the chance of localized flooding. We could see 2.5 inches per hour when that rain is coming down. So in terms of the rainfall, we're looking at hourly rates of 1 to 2 inches, possibly up to 2.5. That's really fast. It's blinding rain. So we could see some localized flooding, and we're looking at a whole lot of rain, especially along the coast here, because that's pulling that moisture off the Gulf. So where you see the reds, the oranges, the yellows, even into portions of Arkansas, the Tennessee Valley, the lower Mississippi Valley, we're going to see the chance for some heavy rain, and that's going to continue as we head throughout tomorrow. As a result, we are concerned for the chance for flash flooding. The greatest risk would be right around the coast here, Lake Charles to Houston, where you see that darker blue, but could see localized flash flooding to Lufkin, Alexandria, also Shreveport. So this is going to be a big story as we go throughout the afternoon, evening hours, and one that we're going to watch very closely. Here's the setup. An area of low pressure bringing that Gulf moisture into the Mississippi Valley, the southern plains, that severe risk in addition to heavy, heavy downpours. And then as we go throughout tomorrow, that area of low pressure is going to move off to the north and east. It's sort of going to lose its own, still have the chance for some strong storms along the Gulf Coast, but not that severe threat that we're seeing today. Rain will reach the northeast and mid-Atlantic, but not enough to kind of ease that drought. But still, we're going to see kind of a dreary day on Friday. Out to the west, we're looking at some snow alerts from the Pacific Northwest into the Four Corners. We have winter storm warnings, winter storm watches, also winter weather advisories, and that's due to that atmospheric river in addition to an area of low pressure in the Four Corners. And as we kind of put radar over this, we're seeing that rain already falling, and we're going to see a couple inches along the coast there, especially in Washington, Oregon, into Northern California. But then it's going to move inland as we head throughout the next couple of days. And look at all those bright colors. That means we're looking at heavy rain for Portland into Eugene, into portions of Northern California as well. But the rain's also going to move inland as we go throughout tomorrow. Heavy snowfall, 1 to 2 feet in lots of spots in the higher elevations. And that's where you see the pinks and purples. The setup here, we have that area of low pressure, that atmospheric river kind of moving onshore. That's going to bring strong rain, strong winds, some rain, wind, and mountain snow. So we have a lot going on. The East Coast is quiet today, but we're going to bring the rain into the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic tomorrow.
Skiers are happy, I think.
So happy, right? We're piling it up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
Right, in some of those perfect places. Sun Valley, Boise. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
Well, this morning we are remembering former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who in his time was one of the most powerful and influential men in global affairs, but his legacy is very much open to debate.
He served presidents of both parties, overseeing international diplomacy during the Vietnam conflict and playing a key role in the normalization of relations with China. He died Wednesday at 100 years old. NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt has more on his life and the work of this controversial figure in American diplomacy.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.
He was brilliant, ambitious, controversial, and one of the most influential secretaries of state in American history.
I think we made further progress.
Henry Kissinger served Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and was consulted by presidents of both parties on international issues throughout his life.
Henry Kissinger has been a friend of mine.
Nixon made him a national figure, and together they reimagined U.S. foreign policy, détente with the Soviet Union, relations with China, shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East. Kissinger helped shape Nixon's policy in Vietnam and negotiated an end to the war, famously declaring success prematurely, just days before the 1972 election.
We believe that peace is at hand.
He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
Nothing that has happened to me in public life has moved me more than this award.
Though his co-recipient, North Vietnam's Le Duc Tho, declined the honor. 4 years later, President Ford awarded him the Medal of Freedom. He was a master of pragmatic, big-picture diplomacy, but he had his critics, who described him as manipulative and insecure. Some called him a war criminal for his role in bombing Cambodia and widening the war in Vietnam. Born in Germany in 1923, Kissinger's Jewish family fled to America as Hitler rose to power. He became a U.S. citizen, served in World War II, and earned a Ph.D. at Harvard, where he became a professor. He caught the eye of Richard Nixon, who made him National Security Advisor, then Secretary of State, the only person ever to hold both jobs simultaneously.
There is no country in the world where it is conceivable that a man of my origins could be standing here next to the President of the United States.
But their relationship was complicated, and White House tapes reveal that Kissinger sometimes enabled the worst in Nixon.
It was a very curious relationship because we were not personally very close.
The night before he resigned in disgrace, Nixon asked Kissinger to kneel and pray with him.
And of course, it was a crushing event. But I think of that evening as an experience with dignity, and it was very moving.
Kissinger was no faceless bureaucrat. He was a world-renowned celebrity.
I loved your foreign accent.
And he loved the spotlight. He was even something of a pop culture icon. After leaving government, he opened his own consulting firm, remaining active and sought after for decades. At 95, eulogizing John McCain's life, Kissinger sounded a wistful note about his own.
Like most people of my age, I feel a longing for what is lost and cannot be restored.
Henry Kissinger was a man of great accomplishment and controversy. But as he once told NBC's Barbara Walters, he had no regrets.
If I had to do it over again, I would do again substantially the same way, which may make me unreconstructed, and maybe one reason why I'm at peace with myself.
Lester Holt, NBC News, New York.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.